Okay, good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Bevan. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Bevan Associates. We're in a local Ohio law firm just outside of Akron. We're about 60 miles or so from here, and we've been representing people throughout the state of Ohio for the last 40 years. And we're really proud to be a part of this East Palestine Justice.com team. We've been representing people like you who play by the rules and are harmed by corporations that don't play by the rules. That's what we've done, and we've been proud to do that throughout Ohio. We've represented thousands of people across the state, and many people right here in Columbiana County. Prior to this derailment even, we've represented people that were exposed to toxic substances such as asbestos and benzene and vinyl chloride. And I got to tell you, I'm just as mad as everybody else in this room is about what happened here. To happen in a place so close to where I live is frankly personally upsetting. You know, not long before the derailment in East Palestine, that train went about a half mile from my house. Right through Hudson, where I live. And my associate attorney Josh Grunda, that's here tonight, his family, his wife grew up here in Columbiana County. He has family that live here in Columbiana County. And my wife, whose parents live in Western Pennsylvania, she was in the danger zone the day that the derailment happened, and the day, in 2 days after, I believe, during that time when they were burning that stuff, and so many people were being exposed to those chemicals in that cloud. And so really we take this personally, and that's why my firm has assisted in putting together this amazing team of lawyers and advocates that are going to speak to you here tonight and that are representing many of the people that were affected by this derailment. And so I'm going to introduce you to Attorney Mikal Watts, who's going to go through a PowerPoint presentation that's going to talk about some of the medical and legal aspects that you're going to be facing, and anybody in this community is facing, and things that we're going to be dealing with in the legal system and in our attempts to get people compensated. And so I'm glad you've all come out here tonight to learn what you could do to protect yourself following this disaster. And before I turn it over to Mikal, and he's going to mention it as well, but I want to mention, I mentioned earlier about playing by the rules, and we as lawyers, we have rules that we have to follow, and we do follow them. And our rules are created by the Ohio Supreme Court, and they tell us that we're allowed to have a public meeting like this to give information to the public, but we're not permitted to answer individual questions or meet with you one-on-one tonight. We're able to do that later and answer your questions later and talk with you directly later, but we're not allowed to do that tonight. It's just the rules that our Supreme Court... I know Morgan & Morgan are Florida lawyers, and maybe they didn't... maybe they're not following the rules, but we follow the rules here. So... But you're certainly welcome to contact us for a consultation. We urge you to, there's those folders that we were distributing out front. The rules say I'm not allowed to hand you that folder. We're allowed to put them there and make them available, so I encourage you to grab one of those folders, contact us for a direct consultation, and we'll answer your questions. And you're certainly, of course, welcome to choose any lawyer of your own choosing. It doesn't have to be us as well. So I want to introduce you to Mikal Watts. I'm so thrilled to have Mikal come here and join us in this fight. He's been through these fights many times for many years, and so he's a key part of our team that we've assembled here to try to help the people that have been victim of this terrible negligence by Norfolk Southern. And I'll turn things over now to Mikal Watts.
Thank you, and thanks for coming. I'm Mikal Watts. I'm a lawyer who's originally from Texas. I want to give you information, and then I'm going to answer your question about the question and answer. But if we could, let me just kind of run through this. The first thing I want to tell you is that what happened to you is not unusual. and that's a shame. The hazard of train derailments has been known in this world for well over 100 years. If you go back to the World War I time frame, you had these huge loss of life because of train derailment that kind of put the hazard of train derailment on the map. Back in Guadalajara, Mexico in 1915, before the war, 600 people died after a derailment. During the war in Romania, a troop carrier jumped the tracks, killed 800 people. Same year in France, 800 people died when you had a derailment. During World War II in Belvano, Italy, 500 people died. As recently as the 1980s in India, 500 deaths. In Ethiopia, 428 deaths. In Russia, more recently, 575 deaths. And it's real easy for we Americans to say, well, that only happens in the third world. This isn't something that persistently happens in the United States, but when you look at the actual data, this hazard is well known, and we have a lot of experience with respect to it here in the U.S. as well. I do a lot of work with Aaron Brockovich, who first got after PG&E in that movie that maybe you've seen in 1981. So I just went back, 1991, just went back 30 years. And you can see that what happened to you has happened repetitively. In 1991, 19,000 gallons of a herbicide were dumped into a stream in Dunsmuir, California, beautiful area. Superior, Washington in 1992, 15,000 gallons of benzene. In 2002 in Minot, North Dakota, 146,700 gallons of anhydrous ammonia, which ain't good. And so you see over and over again, as recently as 2012 in Paulsboro, New Jersey, 23,000 gallons of a chemical that you all are now familiar with, vinyl chloride. And I'll get back to this particular derailment because same company and same chemical. And in what I do, that's what you call notice. This happened over a decade ago, and it told this company they've got a hazard when you have a derailment while you're carrying something as toxic as vinyl chloride. More recently in Tennessee, you see 24,000 gallons. And so the bottom line is train derailment's been known internationally and domestically as a major hazard, both from the standpoint of loss of life and from the standpoint of the potential exposure to toxic substances that are being carried by these trains. So then I asked the question, well, how much does this company know about this hazard? And of course, I think you've learned that they know a lot about it. Back in 2002 in Farragut, Tennessee, they dumped 10,600 gallons of sulfuric acid following a Norfolk Southern train derailment. In 2012, I mentioned this Paulsboro, New Jersey, 23,000 gallons of vinyl chloride, the very substance that over 1 million gallons was burned into your atmosphere and exposed all of you. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. In 2018, not 50 miles from here, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they had 46 double stacks, 23 well cars, jumped the tracks. Fortunately, nobody was killed, and there wasn't a big environmental disaster because that particular train was carrying Listerine and Pampers, but you can see that they know. In 2023, of course, what happened to you? Just devastation of this area environmentally, and we'll talk about that. But I asked the question, has anybody died from a Norfolk Southern train derailment? And so we have the equivalent of something called Westlaw, which is the equivalent of like Google for lawyers. And we can go on and do Boolean searches and search Norfolk Southern and the phrase derailment. And there's a lot of appellate court cases that I've read them all just to kind of get a feel of what's going on here. And when you read all of these, you'll find a number of train derailments involving Norfolk Southern. And this Paulsboro 2012 case came up, and so we dug in on it, and we found a case called Viola Scott versus Norfolk Southern. And in that case, you had a train that was going across a bridge in a small town, about the number of people as in East Palestine, 5,000 or 6,000, and jumped the tracks. And here they had a situation where vinyl chloride was released. People were exposed to it. A gentleman by the name of Michael Hardy and his mother, Wessie Hardy, were residents of Paulsboro at the time. She was working in her yard at the time of the incident. She presented to the hospital with breathing difficulties, chest pain, burning, irritation of the eyes. We've seen a lot of that in the news reports here. And she perished from exposure to vinyl chloride 4 days after that derailment. And so they know that this is a terrible chemical that can kill people, and it's dangerous and it's toxic. So they got sued. And as often happens by these big companies, they have liability insurance. They write a letter to the insurance company settles it, and they go on down the track. But it's notice about what vinyl chloride can do more than a decade before it happened to you. I like to believe these cases aren't just about money, they're about people. And in that case, a lady by the name of Wessie Hardy, that's a picture of her. On the right side, this is her obituary. She died on December the 3rd, 2012, more than a decade before your town and your community was impacted. I actually talked to a lady by the name of Charmette Brown from Paulsboro. This is a picture I took on my phone, and that's me talking to her by Zoom. And she says they got multiple letters, don't drink the water, for years. And she still doesn't drink the water 11 years after this. One of my experts, Bob Bocock, talks about a situation up in New York where there was a train derailment and a professed cleanup, everything's fine. And they were out there on another case some 40-something years later and found all of the stuff in the woods, and it's now been declared a Superfund site by the EPA almost 50 years after that. So these chemicals stick around unless they're properly excavated and taken out. Now, we know that there's been prior train derailments internationally, domestically, and by this company. So I asked the question, well, how often has it happened? This particular company, how prevalent is this, or is it just one of those things where things happen? So we did a little research on that, and the Transportation Administration, you all saw Buttigieg out here, he's the administrator of it, or the secretary of it. They keep databases where all the accidents have to be entered in, and so you can go on that database and type in Norfolk Southern and derailment and figure out how many derailments there have been. And one of my lawyers, Jay Henderson, I couldn't believe when he sent me this. He says, my crude review of the data for 2003 to 2022 says that Norfolk Southern has reported 3,397 events classified as a derailment. Now, using the principle that my mama taught me called division, 3,378 divided by 20 years, I mean, that's roughly a derailment every 2 or 3 days. And that's just hard to fathom. But as you know, since that happened, they've had plenty of other derailments that you've now read about, and they're kind of on schedule, if you will. Every few days we hear about another Norfolk Southern derailment. So what did they do to prevent derailments before this one that so terribly impacted your town? We know that the number of accidents that they reported went up from 79 in 2012 to 770 in 2022. That is not possible unless there's something broken with your safety culture. Not possible. It's almost a 10-time increase over the course of a decade. Now, we also know that during that decade, they've had record profits, record compensation for their executives, and apparently amassed enough money last year to buy back over $10 billion of their stock. And so it's not a lack of money to maintain these cars, it's where they're putting the money. You either put it in inspections and maintenance and technology, or you put it in your pocket and give it to your executives and give it to your shareholders, which is what they've been doing. We've got a lot of data that as they got more profit, their accident rates have gone up. Some of the stuff talked about in the New York Times, safety experts say a focus on financial returns may be partly to blame for derailments and accidents like the one that happened in Ohio. And as we dig in, we're seeing that that's very true. We've got good publicly available data with respect to hazmat cars that have been in accidents, hazmat or chemicals that have been released. We know that it's persistent. And so then we go into their corporate compensation. They have what's known as an annual report. If you're a publicly traded corporation, you have to file a report on 10K with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and you have to put forth your income and what you're paying and the like. And so we've got it, and I'm sorry this isn't very easy to see, so I've made it bigger. But the bottom line is from 2020 to 2022, their profits went up about 62%. Now, I want to be fair. I'll bet the pandemic had something to do with this, but the point is that this is not a company that's having economic problems that would explain why their maintenance is so poor. They're doing very well. And they're doing so well, they've bought back over $10 billion of shares at the same time that their accident rate is skyrocketing. And so you can start tying the two together and realize why we're here. So what happened on February the 3rd, you all know, but there is an outfit in Salem, and I drove by it, Butech Bliss. I think a lot of you guys know what this company is, but they have surveillance cameras. And one of their surveillance cameras caught this train going through about 20, 25 miles from where the derailment occurred. And I've got some screenshots instead of the videos, but as we blow them up, you'll see what happened. But the NTSB has concluded, and I think they're right, that the initial fire that was seen on that video was the result of the hot axle and the plastic pellets inside the rail car. That's a maintenance issue that we're going to get after them for. But, you know, if they just had a fire and didn't cause a derailment, we wouldn't be here, right? So we'll talk about maintenance here in a second, but here's that video, and there's a screenshot that was captured on Butech Bliss's surveillance video. And this is 20-something miles from the track. Now, it's amazing to me in 2023 how somebody wouldn't know that their car is on fire or that their railroad car is on fire. And so you ask, well, what kind of technology existed? Number one, can you look back? I thought there'd be cameras all over this and like that, but they've got hot box detectors. And so we'll visit about that. But as you look at what happened, the bottom line is as going down the track, the temperature of car number 23 continues to rise. And that's detected as you pass different areas of the track. These hot box detectors, very typical technology in the railway industry, detect the temperature of the cars that are going by, and then there's signals sent to the home office, in effect, back in Georgia. It tells them how much above ambient temperature, how much higher than it should be is the reading. And so they go in and they get these different readings, and they continue to rise as the train's going down the track. So why didn't the crew stop? Well, as it happens, Norfolk Southern sets the threshold above ambient temperature, which will set off an alarm. There's no regulation in this, they just set it. So Norfolk Southern set it at 117 degrees above ambient temperature. And so the first two that showed a rising temperature was showing that something was on fire and the temperature was getting hotter, but they set the alarm setting such that no alarm went off. And so that was a problem, and it wasn't until the last hot box reading, where it was 253 degrees above ambient temperature, that the alarm went off. One thing that we don't yet know, and I'm sorry you can't see this, the lighting's not very good in here, but one thing that we don't yet know is whether or not that signal was in fact communicated to the crew, and I'll get you that in a second. But we know why the fire was happening, the hot axle and the plastic pellets. And we know that as we go from 30 miles to 20 miles, eventually there's one that sounded the alarm. But the bottom line is it didn't sound until it was 253 degrees above ambient temperature, which leads to the obvious question from the NTSB, had there been a detector earlier, the derailment may not have occurred. And that's by the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, and she's right. Okay, so that's question number one, is why didn't they have more hot box detectors? Now, question number two is after you get the alarm or the instructions to slow down and stop the train, why did it jump the track? And this is mystifying to me. You know, I've seen the movie Runaway Train that was just Hollywood, but I mean, that thing's going 78, 80 miles an hour as only Hollywood can make it. This train wasn't going particularly fast. And when it derailed, it wasn't at high speed. So why is it jumping the tracks? So the bottom line is the crew eventually gets direction to immediately slow and to stop the train and to conduct an investigation or an inspection, i.e. get out and see that car number 23 is on fire, not good. So they start decelerating, and then they have a second maintenance issue, and that is that the rail car wheel bearing failed. Maintenance issue number two, okay? So we've got maintenance issue number one, why was there a fire? We've got detection issue about why wasn't there a signal about the fire? And third, we've got another maintenance issue, why once they got the word about the fire and decelerated, did that cause a derailment of the train? Now we could talk about how many cars and it was almost 1.5 miles long and the like, but the rail car wheel bearing is not supposed to fail. So why does it fail? The NTSB says it's studying that, but well-known causes for roller bearings to overheat include fatigue cracking, water damage, and mechanical damage. So this is basic failure to maintain or a failure to inspect. If anybody had laid their lying eyes on this area, you would have seen fatigue cracking or water damage or mechanical damage. Roller bearings don't overheat for no reason. There are visual clues that it's going to happen if you bother to look. There are visual clues that it's going to happen if you bother to put into your budget sufficient systematic inspections where people can put their eyes on it. But that didn't happen here. So this is the consequence. What happened? You've got all these cars, 38 cars derailed, fire damage, an additional 12 cars according to the NTSB. As you know, a lot of them are carrying hazardous materials. Here's what it looked like. And a lot of you all saw this from miles away, and this is before the controlled release, okay? This kind of stuff, burning these kinds of chemicals in a community with people is a recipe for an environmental disaster. All right, let's go a couple of days later. You all know about the controlled release. And I had an old boy in the first meeting, controlled hell. And it didn't look very controlled to me either, guys. But I will tell you, having studied this, you know, there's a lot of criticism about what was done and like that. I think that people of good faith in your government were trying to protect the town of East Palestine from being blown up, because vinyl chloride is so flammable and so heavily combustible that if you had temperature and pressure rising, by the way, there are reasons because of maintenance on these cars that it was rising and the pressure was going up. We'll get to that in another issue. But the decision to do the controlled burn, I could argue both sides of that coin, to be quite honest, okay? All right, so they do the controlled burn. It looks like Hiroshima went off in your town, and not just in the town of East Palestine. First time I came here to this theater, an old boy that's one of your neighbors here in Columbiana showed me a picture from his house not a mile from here going straight up with this plume above him. And so, you know, it clearly not only went in certain directions towards Pennsylvania, but it came far enough over here that you all were exposed. So what's happened since February the 3rd? Well, a lot. First, you've had some really good local people, the fire chief, the mayor, and I'll even give some credit to the governors of both these states, okay? And I'm not going to touch politics here because I know everybody's pissed off at them. But the bottom line is lots of information flow, and the EPA had its man down here as well trying to provide information. There's been a lot of politics about whose fault this is. You know, guys, put aside the politics, it's this company's fault. They have a non-delegable duty to prevent this from happening, and it happened because of corporate decisions that they made. And those corporate decisions are the reason that every 2 or 3 days you have a derailment. You recall that about a week after, there was a derailment in Michigan. And now you learned about a derailment in Central Ohio before. And then there's since been a derailment. We tried to get the video of it jumping the track because it's amazing to watch. But the bottom line is the one thing that Norfolk Southern is doing good is it's keeping its schedule right on time. Every 2 or 3 days you can set your clock and they're going to derail another train. There's a reason for that. Okay? It's poor maintenance choices. It's poor resource allocation that's led to what happened to you and is going to frankly lead to the fixes. I do want to throw out a shout out to some of your community members. Jessica Conrad and Jim Stewart a couple of weeks ago went to New York, participated in the CNN town hall, and they were on the same stage with Alan Shaw and just jumped him. And as Jim Stewart said, "You burned me." Yeah. I get it. And that kind of public awareness and getting in their face is the reason that all of a sudden, after years and years and years of taking railroad industry money and not doing a damn thing to stop this regulatorily. Everybody's interested in rail safety, but it takes people like Jessica Conrad, who I think is in Washington testifying in front of the United States Senate today. So my message is follow her, be the squeaky wheel, okay? Because your efforts, your advocacy efforts, independent of litigation and lawsuits, will be the reason that future derailments can be prevented if you don't let what happened to East Palestine in this area just become a footnote in history. All right. One other thing I want to give a little props on, the NTSB. I do a lot of transportation litigation. I've sued the car companies for decades for seatbelts that don't work and fuel tanks that blow up and the like. I've done a lot of air crash stuff. And my big frustration with the NTSB is they come in, they grab all the evidence, they put it in a warehouse and keep it there for a year, and nobody knows what the hell happened. They don't issue a report for a year and a half. To their great credit, they issued a preliminary report within 3 weeks of this derailment. That doesn't happen. And so that's good. Number two, the quality of that report is excellent. I think they've nailed it already. So at least people know what happened and we can start working about how to prevent it. All right, several things since then. Number one, there is a story that we're going to have to hunt down in the discovery process when we take depositions and the like. There's a story in something called ProPublica that says, hey, there may have been a practice where Norfolk Southern allows its monitoring teams back in Georgia to instruct crews to ignore alerts from the train track sensors that are designed to flag potential problems. Now, I don't know whether we've got a threshold problem. They set the threshold so high that there wasn't even an alarm that went to Georgia, or they got an alarm and just said, I'll just keep on going. It's no big deal. We'll have to figure that out. But it's interesting. The policy applies specifically to the company's wayside detector help desk, which monitors data from the trackside sensors. Workers on the desk can tell crews to disregard an alert when information is available confirming it's safe to proceed and to continue no faster than 30 miles an hour. That didn't work here. I think the train was going 29 when it jumped. Okay? All right. Next thing. This was in the Wall Street Journal. This particular car number 23, where the fire began, was owned by a company, I think out of Houston, called GATX, a publicly traded rail car owner. It was built in 1997, so it was about 26 years old, 25, 26 years old. Trinity Industries, another publicly traded company, built the Hopper car, and the car was certified for 50 years of service. So we're digging up the details about the very car where the fire began, because it started for a reason. I can tell you that these things happen when you don't have appropriate maintenance programs, okay? But that's where it came from, and, you know, we'll jump in all over that. You've seen a lot of newspaper articles. This is the Washington Post, where the EPA, in effect, ordered that dioxins be tested for. Now, a lot of us don't know what dioxins are. I can just tell you it's real bad, okay? Dioxins were not being carried on the train, so why are we testing for it? There are 5 or 6 chemicals that were being transported that, when they go through the chemical reactions that are part of combustion, create dioxins, okay? So we have to test for dioxins because we know these things combusted or burned up, and so dioxins are everywhere, and the EPA has ordered that dioxins be tested for here. The EPA has already sent out a letter attributing responsibility for this derailment and ordering Norfolk Southern to clean it up and to pay for the cleanup, okay? So that's as close as you can to a regulatory agency saying it's your fault, you pay for it, okay? All right. This is why we've got to be very careful what we're doing here. There are some researchers from the Texas A&M University, and I went to the University of Texas. It might as well be like Ohio State and Michigan. We harass each other and like that, but the truth of the matter is it's an excellent engineering school, and they've got people that are very well regarded in this industry, and they came here and they tested a bunch of the surface waters in East Palestine, and if you look at the column that's in the red box, you see how there's a bunch of them that say less than 100, but we've got one that says more than, or 2,400 right there in the middle, and a couple that are less than 400. That is a level of vinyl chloride that was detected in surface water samples taken from, in effect, the streams and the rivers and the drinking water here. Now, you say, okay, 2,400 UGs per liter in surface water, what does that mean? Is that bad? The EPA and the regulatory agencies say, look, the maximum limit is 2. Okay? That maximum limit of 2 UGs per liter for vinyl chloride has been established in the literature for a long time. You don't want to be exposed to something that's more than 2, and yet we know your water had samples that showed 2,400 and several of them above 400. And so this is a problem. It's here. Okay? It's here. And, you know, the governor can show up and the administrator of the EPA can show up and drink a glass of water and get the hell out of town. One glass of water of this stuff is not going to kill you, but you stay here and drink it for a long time. If it's got this stuff in it, not good. Okay? All right. So, let me talk to you about the chemicals, just because I think this is an important thing. I think, you know, I'm going to blow the next 15 minutes talking about 6 chemicals. I could do this in 15 seconds, say it's bad shit. Excuse my language. It's not good. But the details of it are as follows. We know what was in each of the cars. We got real good data of how much of this stuff was released or burned or exposed. And so what was it? There's 6 chemicals. Vinyl chloride, just to give you a backdrop, there were 5 cars carrying 115,580 gallons of it. It's a flammable and toxic gas used to make PVC pipe. Okay? They released 1.1 million pounds of it after the derailment. It's been called one of the worst environmental disasters in America's history, and vinyl chloride is the main reason for it. It's a highly mobile chemical in soils and water. What does that mean? It's hard to contain. It's hard to keep it stationary. Because it's mobile, a lot of people have called for this deadly chemical to just be banned. But it's there and it's in your community whether we like it or not. There's a group with the World Health Organization called the International Agency on Research and Cancer. You can go back decades, 50 years, and they've talked about this particular chemical when people are exposed to it. It causes 2 different cancers of the liver, lung, neoplasms of the connective and soft tissues, the tendons and stuff that keep our, you know, our stuff together, and other cancers as well. It's not good. OSHA is so concerned about people being exposed to it that when you have a work site that has vinyl chloride on it, they've got to put up this sign warning people that vinyl chloride can cause cancer. When the EPA, they say it's a major concern via inhalation because it's readily absorbed in the lungs. That same fellow that took the picture from here told me every time he went out on his motorcycle he felt sick, and I said, yeah, you're breathing in this garbage like breathing out of a hairdryer, and so what does it cause? As I read the articles about the complaints for people in this community, it fits like a glove: drowsiness, loss of coordination, visual and auditory abnormalities, headaches, disorientation, nausea, burning or tingling of the extremities. The very conditions that people are explaining of have been in the literature with respect to how people feel after they've been exposed to vinyl chloride. It's so bad that the Code of Federal Regulations, 29 CFR 1910.1017, provides for mandatory medical surveillance if you've got an inadvertent exposure to vinyl chloride in the workplace. And it says that the employer has to institute a program of medical surveillance, an opportunity for examinations of tests under the supervision of a licensed physician without cost to the employee. So if that's good enough for the government to require in the workplace setting, why aren't they providing it in an environmental exposure setting? It's the same chemical. It's the same exposure. And so this is part of what we're doing here, is to try to get you all this medical surveillance program. You're going to hear about something known as medical monitoring. It's a cause of action that's often pursued in these kinds of cases, and it goes something like this. We know that we have a chemical that was released to which we were exposed, and that chemical is well known to cause cancer. Now, the advantage of living in the United States as opposed to some of those other places where there were derailments is in the United States, we do not die of cancer. We die of undiagnosed cancer, untreated cancer that is not detected early enough to prevent its metastasis into stuff that kills you. So it's undiagnosed metastasized cancer that can kill you. So the concept behind the legal notion of medical monitoring is if you have a pool of people that we know have been exposed to a known carcinogen, let's monitor them and test them frequently so that if one of them does get cancer, we capture it early enough that we can put them in good oncology programs and prevent that cancer from being a cancer killer. Okay? So that's the concept. And in the in the occupational setting, it's required by law when you have a release of vinyl chloride. Here, it's going to take lawsuits, but the idea is if you've been exposed to the same thing, you should be entitled to the same medical monitoring. All right, so that's vinyl chloride, bad, bad, bad. Butyl acrylate, one of its manufacturers, Mitsubishi Chemicals. It's a raw material for fiber processing agents, adhesives, coatings, plastics, acrylic rubber, emulsions. Another one of the manufacturers, it has a general toxic effect. It irritates the skin, the mucous membrane, the upper respiratory tract, and the digestive tract. Symptoms include headache, dizziness, tiredness, nausea, and vomiting, and you get lightheadedness, chest pain, muscle pain, and flushing. Ethylene glycol, same kind of thing. We're not as smart as you guys up here down in Texas, but even our mamas taught you don't drink antifreeze. And here you've been exposed to antifreeze. That's what this chemical is. It's a solvent in the plastic and paint industry, and my mama didn't have to teach me not to drink paint. It's not good, okay? But this is what you were exposed to, ethylene glycol. It can cause death if swallowed. Workers can be harmed from exposure to ethylene glycol. That's because it puts off toxic metabolites and that can damage the brain, the liver, the kidneys, and the lungs through a process known as metabolic acidosis. It's been known to cause profound shock, organ failure, and death, and it's not good. 2-ethylhexyl acrylate. This is, in effect, the ester, which is a byproduct of acrylic acid. It's used as a raw material for adhesives, coatings, construction materials, acrylic rubber, and emulsions. Acute exposure causes drowsiness, lethargy, headache, nausea, convulsions, and respiratory and gastrointestinal irritation. Number 5, isobutylene. Isobutylene is kind of a lubricant used for coking materials in refineries, asphalt, fertilizers, dispersants. It's really bad because it displaces oxygen. You've heard about some bombs that will suck all the oxygen out of the air. This is what this chemical does as well. It can cause rapid suffocation. And then lastly, we have benzene. And benzene, I don't need to tell you it's bad. Benzene is something that's been known for 5 decades by IARC, the International Agency on Research on Cancer of the World Health Organization, as being a carcinogen. Benzene is used as an additive to unleaded gasoline. Again, Mama didn't need to teach me not to drink unleaded gasoline, okay? At the work site, you got to have signs saying benzene, cancer hazard. Everybody knows it. You've heard of leukemia, which is a blood cancer. This is well known to cause an increased prevalence of leukemia for people who are occupationally exposed to benzene. It is a known human carcinogen, a class 1 carcinogen, the most dangerous. And so lastly, we have dioxin, which again was not carried in the train, but because of the combustion process, this chemical was created as a byproduct of combustion. It's known to cause cancer, birth defects, and other reproductive harm. All right, so that's the soup of terribles to which you were exposed. So what do we do about it? So one of the reasons that this is the 3rd time in 2 weeks that I've been here is I have done these kind of environmental exposure cases before. There is a difference between what you're reading the paper in terms of the court of public opinion and what you have to show up with in a court of law. As a plaintiff in a court of law, you own the burden of proof. You have to show up with a positive proof. And we have to come up with objective evidence of your exposure, and we'll talk about how to do that. The first thing that I would say is it's time to move on testing blood, urine, and DNA. We have a website, eastpalestinejustice.com. There used to be a provision where you could click here, and we gave you the location of all of the labs for diagnostic testing within a 50-mile area. And I had them all listed in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. We sent everybody to these, and they said, we don't know how to test for this stuff. It's not true, but they're just not doing it, okay? We've since gotten in touch with people that, well, okay, we know this stuff dissipates out of the blood and the urine after a certain amount of time. You can go to Walmart and buy a bunch of containers and stick little stickers with the date of your containers. If you can't get your urine tested, I encourage you to do that. Stick it in the back of the fridge, as gross as that sounds for now. That's right. So in addition to that, this is what I want to update you on. We have hired toxicologists and medical doctors and everything like that. And there's a Dr. Raj Batra, and I won't take you through all of his stuff, but he is well qualified, okay? And we've consulted with him, and he says, look, if you were exposed to this, I want you tested with blood, urine, and saliva. If you were exposed but don't have any present signs, at the very least get your DNA tested, which is a saliva swab, okay? That's easy enough to do. They should be preserved indefinitely for future medical and scientific study. You can go to a Thermo Fisher website. It's https://www.thermofisher.com/order/catalog/product/A50696. This is a testing device that will test your DNA through a saliva swab. It costs about $1, okay? I strongly encourage you to do this, okay? And here's why. I want to talk to you a little bit about our team and the people that have put on this seminar. There's 3 law firms involved. Tom, who was just here, is our outstanding Ohio lawyer. He's got 3 or 4 people working on this. Angeli, I think, is also licensed in Pennsylvania, be at our meeting tonight across the border. My law firm is Watts Guerra. Alicia O'Neill, my law partner, is here somewhere. I've got Jay Henderson, who's a 30-year lawyer working on this. Paige Bolt, who's a mass tort specialist working on this. And then we've got a 3rd firm called Sunridge Legal. Doug Boxer from California, Gary Morrow from Texas, Michael Bernard, who's here. And then we've got a bunch of consultants. You've heard that Aaron Brockovich is here in town, not tonight, but has been and will be. Bob Bocock is a hydrologist, and Dr. Teresa LeBay is a medical doctor that works full-time for me to assist me to make sure that I'm giving sound advice with respect to this kind of stuff. Let me just show you something about Bob Bocock, for example. He was here last week, and he took this video. And that is the aeration of the water supply in East Palestine. And what scared him is this aeration is being done right next to the water wells. And that's not good. And so he's had a bunch of discussions with the water district, with the mayor, with this kind of stuff. You have people coming into homes and, as he says, spraying Febreze and pretending they're cleaning anything up, and there's a set way to do this. And so we're trying to get some education out to the people that are supposed to be remediating as quickly as we can. With respect to this slide, I'm going to get to your question about why no questions and answers in a minute, but we consult with ethics experts. I practice all over the nation in 50 states. I can't know all the rules in 50 different states, and they're all different. So what I do is I call the Supreme Court of Ohio, or I call somebody and say, who's the best ethics guy that knows all the rules? And then we hire them before I ever show up here so I don't get in any trouble. They tell me I need to tell you the following. Even though there's 3 law firms involved, we are not partners in the legal sense. We have 3 independent law firms working together. We have non-lawyer consultants who are being paid for their time. Aaron Brockovich, Bob Bocock, experts that we're hiring and the like. There are many fine law firms that are working on this case including Morgan & Morgan. Mike Morgan's a good buddy of mine, okay? There are great lawyers on the Pennsylvania side, on the Ohio side. You do what's in your best interest. There are many other fine law firms to consider. If you have already retained one of those lawyers, even though this is a public educational seminar, listen to your lawyer. I am not here trying to poach other people's clients, okay? I'm not allowed to give you legal advice on your specific case during a public meeting. Now, I find this odd, just to be blunt, and I'm not being critical of the Supreme Court of Ohio's Ethics Committee, but it's just an unusual rule that I don't see in a lot of the other states, and I'll get back to it in a second. And then lastly, the rules here in Ohio say I can't hand you materials about my firm. You have to pick them up at the exits. So if you got them on the way in, great. If you want them on the way out, great, okay? All right, so let's talk about what we've learned about the litigation. The first thing that any lawyer has to do is evaluate where the case must be filed. This is a concept known as jurisdiction. And because you all are from Ohio and Norfolk Southern is a Georgia-based railroad, you have citizens from a different state on the opposite sides of the V in a lawsuit. Ohio plaintiffs suing a Georgia defendant creates what's known as diversity jurisdiction, which means that this case is properly heard in federal court as opposed to the local state courts. There is one amendment to that. If it turns out that one of the three members of this crew were from the state of Ohio, then you've destroyed diversity and we can go to state court. I don't have that information yet, but I'm predicting for you it's likely that we're going to be in federal court, okay? Not state court. So where, as opposed to federal or state court, where do we have to file the case? This is what's known as venue, which is a lawyer deal about the appropriate venue or site to file a lawsuit. So you all are in the Northern District of Ohio within the federal court system, and then you'll notice there's different colors depending on which county the event happened in. We're in Columbiana County, so we're over to the right. Where do those cases go? And you can look right there at the Northern District website. Columbiana County goes to the Youngstown Division of the Northern District of Ohio Federal Courts. So who's the judge in the Youngstown Division? We know that. And let me take you through and just explain who the judge is. This is United States District Judge Bonita Pearson. Let me tell you what we've learned about her. Number one, she's a Georgetown University graduate in 1985. She worked at British Petroleum for 7 years before she went back to law school and got her JD or her Juris Doctorate or her law degree from Cleveland State University in 1995. By all accounts, she has to be really smart. And the reason I know that is she got a federal judgeship clerkship, which only the guys with the very best grades get. So she did that for a couple of years, and then she joined one of the largest law firms in the world, Cleveland-based Jones, Day, Rivas, and Pogue, worked there for a couple of years, and then went to be a federal prosecutor where she's prosecuting, trying federal criminal cases on behalf of the United States government. She did that for about 8 years and apparently did so well that she was selected by the United States district judges from the area to be what's called a U.S. magistrate judge, which is an interview process. Lots of qualified people want that job for multiple reasons. It's very interesting. She did that for a couple of years, and for the second reason, it's often a stepping stone to the top job, which is a United States district court position that has to be nominated by the United States president and confirmed by the United States Senate. And she passed that confirmation with flying colors. And she's been a judge in the U.S. District Court position for about 12, 13 years. Got lots of experience. If she makes a mistake, or if either party doesn't like one of her rulings and is alleging a mistake, it goes up to an appeal to the United States Court of Appeals. There are 13 or 14 of those courts of appeals. Cases from federal courts in Ohio go to what's called the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And so we've got a bunch of research about the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Different courts of appeals have different decisional paths about what they say about things, and they have rules of law. There's a doctrine in the law known as stare decisis, okay? And again, please don't let me touch politics, but you remember last year when they overruled Roe versus Wade? Remember, oh my God, you didn't follow stare decisis, you reverse your. By and large, the rule is that you follow precedent, you don't reverse it, okay? Inside of a district court located within the Sixth Circuit, they are duty bound to follow the precedent issued by the higher court, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's going to become important here in a second. And then, of course, if somebody doesn't like what the Sixth Circuit does, they can go up to the high nine, as we call them, the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay? They only accept about 1 out of every 200 cases that there's an application for. So most often, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is going to be your court of last resort. Okay? So, you have Benita Pearson sitting in the Youngstown Division of the Northern District of Ohio, who is duty-bound to follow the precedent as set forth by the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Okay. So, we have to evaluate potential causes of action. Federal courts sitting in diversity, it's called the Erie Doctrine. They have to follow Ohio law if they're based in Ohio. And so these are all the different causes of action that we've researched. And I rely upon Tom Bevan on this. And Bevan, sent us some cases. And so you've got, negligent infliction of emotional distress in certain circumstances. Fear of cancer may be a cognizable or a recognized cause of action here. You were exposed to something that clearly is a cancer causer. Can you do that? But the bottom line is there's rules about whether you can do that. You have to be associated with an enhanced risk of cancer. In other words, it can't be just you say, I'm fearful of having cancer. The data has to say that you have an objective basis for that fear. And so we'll talk about that. But, before I came here the last time, there was an article in a lawyer rag called Law 360. And they interviewed a bunch of defense lawyers, and they said, well, this looks bad, but all these defense lawyers said, anybody filing a lawsuit in this railroad case is probably going to lose. That's what this article says. And so I start reading it, and they cite a case called TransUnion versus Ramirez, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case requiring injury in fact as opposed to perceived injury. I'm not real worried about that case because that's a Federal Credit or Fair Credit Reporting Act case. But the second one that's cited, this Hirsch versus CSX Transportation, is something we have to deal with. Why? It's a train derailment case from the state of Ohio, where a federal district judge by the name of Dan Polster, you may have heard of him because he was the head of the opioid multi-district litigation. It's been in all the news. I've been working on it for 5 years. Polster's not considered the worst judge for a plaintiff across the country, but he dismissed the case brought by the train derailment victims for fear of cancer. Went up to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, who affirmed his dismissal. And we'll talk about that. There were class actions for some of this stuff that have been wiped out. Over in Pennsylvania, they have something called the economic loss doctrine that basically says people claiming economic losses for the negligence of others can't do it. Ohio's got different rules, and it's not as bad. But the bottom line is that while Ohio doesn't have a requirement of physical injury, it depends upon the legal theory. And I know I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, but let me tell you where this is going, okay? You see, in the Sixth Circuit's Hirsch decision, it requires a greater risk of a raw injury rather than a 1 in a million chance. So you can't just have this I'm fearful thing without objective data showing an increased risk from the standpoint of science. Now, the science thus far says you're going to have a risk. I mean, you've seen it in the Washington Post. There's toxic air pollutants could pose long-term risks, the researchers say. This is these folks from Texas A&M. If the threshold limit is 2 parts per million and you were subjected to 400, that's 200 times. 2,400, that's 1,200 times the safe level and the like. All right. The EPA has said that there's at least 9 air pollutants that, if the levels persist, could raise long-term health concerns in and around East Palestine. The Washington Post cites these Texas A&M researchers saying, look, those chemicals are known to trigger eye and lung irritation, headaches, and other symptoms, all what's been reported by people in this area, as well as some are known or suspected to cause cancer. So these are all things we're looking at. So what kind of damages can you recover? If you have a sufficiently high dose of exposure to a cancer-causing agent, this itself constitutes a physical injury, which is why that water surface testing that we had is important, which is why I want you tested, okay? This increased fear of cancer. It's recognized in the state of Ohio and in the federal courts, but there are rules, and we'll talk about that for a second. But this emotional distress has to be associated with a legitimate fear caused by a statistical increase in the chance of developing future disease. So, we'll get to the Hirsch case about what you have to prove in order to get there. Now, one of the things that we've been doing is we've been sharing the work, if you will, with a bunch of good law firms that are working together, okay? We're probing every possible avenue. We've got experts all over the place. Lots of law firms working together. I've already said this at the instruction of my ethics lawyers, but I know a lot of these law firms, and they're just outstanding, okay? So there's a lot of good lawyers working on this together. We met in Cleveland last Friday. I can't tell you what was said because we all signed a confidentiality agreement, but I can just tell you, looking around the table, we're in good hands. There's a lot of good law firms working on this. There are many other fine law firms for you to consider in deciding what you want to do. If you want to do anything, it's up to you, okay? All right. To prove things in a court of law, oftentimes you need experts. There are several categories of experts. Derailment. We've done a lot of research with respect to past cases from this Google known as Westlaw. We know who the experts are because they've been used in past cases that I've read. We find their names. I call them all. I've talked to these fellas. Everybody's got a bunch of experts on board. We've got their resumes, which lawyers call a CV or a curriculum vitae. I don't know why we don't just call it a resume, but there you have it. So we're in contact with these folks. I've talked to Fred Millar. I've talked to some other people, really good experts. Now, the railroad helped us along. Sometime the week before last, they wrote a letter that you can't see, but they basically said, hey, the EPA has released the site to us, and we're going to get rid of all these rail cars in 2 days' time. So if you want somebody from your side to get to look at the evidence, get up here on the 28th or the 1st of March, which wasn't cool. But we got a bunch of people up here in time to do it, and I get the point. I mean, the people of East Palestine don't want to look at that train wreck for the rest of their lives. I get it. But anyway, there's generally a duty to preserve evidence, and I'm sorry you can't see all of this, but the bottom line is we got experts up there, photographed everything, documented the proof before it disappears. There was a hearing in front of Judge Pearson asking for more time. She got the parties together. We agreed on an extension, but we learned a lot about Judge Pearson. She's a no-nonsense judge who is primarily concerned with remediating the site over and above anything else because she understands the risks, which is good. She's outstanding. We've got experts on meteorology and wind dispersion. We collected all the data about which direction the wind was going, at what velocity, why? Because I've got to prove that your particular physical location was in the zone of exposure. If you were 18 counties over that day, or you evacuated for 2 or 3 weeks and you weren't exposed to the plume. You may be exposed to the stuff that is settled on your property, but we'll have to prove that exposure, okay? So we've got meteorologists and wind dispersion experts. We collected all the data about what the level of the wind was, what direction it was going, hour by hour by hour for the 3 weeks or so. We could do it for 3 years if we have to, but 3 weeks ought to pretty much capture it. We've got all that data. We've got experts from the standpoint of the health effects. Let me just use vinyl chloride as an example. Not 50 miles from here, one of the world's preeminent experts on vinyl chloride, Dr. Juliana Bayer at the University of Pittsburgh, she's been publishing a bunch of stuff since this about what she knows about vinyl chloride exposure, and she's tested a bunch of rats in animal testing. And rats have the same body structure in effect that we do. I know you wouldn't believe that, but it's true. They ingest stuff. The pulmonary systems are the same, and so we use rats in a lot of pharmaceutical testing and the like. She's been subjecting rats to vinyl chloride at levels that the government says is safe and finding some pretty scary things with respect to enhanced liver disease. She gives them the rats this stuff at supposedly safe levels of vinyl chloride, and 100% of those mice develop tumors on their liver. So this stuff ain't good. So we've got experts on that. We've got people that and this is what I'm working on primarily, is blood, urine, DNA testing centers. Just trust me when I tell you, nobody's paying for this yet, but get your stuff tested. Blood, urine, DNA, as quickly as you can, because you're going to need it. Why? Because of the Sixth Circuit. Remember this 1 in a million thing? Let me tell you what happened in that case. You had a derailment. It was a CSX car in Ohio. Fear of cancer was alleged as the case, and Judge Polster throws it out. Goes up to the Court of Appeals when the plaintiffs complain, and they say 2,800 tons of burning material were sent into the surrounding atmosphere, toxic chemicals. Plaintiffs claimed the level of dioxin in their town was significantly elevated. The court says, well, what makes the present claim conceptually unique is that the plaintiffs, though no doubt distraught from the stress of a train crash, they have, even by their own admission, as of now, not suffered any discernible compensable injury. Rather, their injuries consist solely of the increased risk and the corresponding costs of screening for certain diseases that, according to the plaintiffs, are more likely to occur as a result of the train crash. Medical monitoring. So in the Hirsch versus CSX case, the Sixth Circuit sets up the rules for what entitles you or not to medical monitoring. So the Court of Appeals says, but the question remains, are these plaintiffs actually at such an increased risk of disease that they're entitled to medical monitoring programs? And they put forth an expert, Dr. Kornberg, a toxicologist from Colorado, who I know well, very well accomplished. And he talks about these MCLs, these maximum limits. Those are set with an increased risk of cancer in a 1 in a million. And the court says, well, the way this is set up, it's not even 1 in a million. It's more like a half of 1 in a million. And oh, by the way, we don't have any evidence as to the members of the class that they were actually exposed. They say they were. And what they say, in effect, is, look, Kornberg's theory doesn't get us there, but here they throw out a hint for future derailment plaintiffs. Perhaps, though we do not require blood tests in every toxic torts, these plaintiffs might have survived summary judgment had they obtained conclusive medical evidence that they face this 1 in a million increase. That is lawyer speak or judge speak. If you could prove that it was in your blood or your urine or your DNA, then you'd have something. So that's why I'm all over you guys about getting tested. This case, okay? And I know it's frustrating, okay? Because the testing agency, we don't know how to do this. That's why I'm saying take blood, take urine, if you have to, get the samples at the very least until we figure out who will do this. The saliva thing and the like, okay? You're documenting evidence. Yeah, I'll get it back to you. I'll go back to it here in a minute. All right. The next thing is of course, there's not much point to lawsuits if the defendants don't have the money to pay the damages. You don't have that problem. This is a very successful company. It's been around a long time. They've already been ordered to pay for the cleanup, which is going to be expensive. To keep their stock up, they told everybody, hey, we've got $1.1 billion in liability insurance. Is that enough? That's not for me to say. Even if it's not, do they have enough assets? We can go back to that Form 10K. We can figure out how much money they have. They've told their shareholders losses associated with such an accident involving its insurance company could result in a material adverse effect on their liquidity. Liquidity is how much cash on hand, how much money do you have? And so when you go into their financials, you see the total stockholders' equity of about $12.7 billion over and above the $1.1 billion in insurance. So they've got plenty of resources. Now, this is the answer to your question about Morgan & Morgan, okay? And I'm not here to criticize other firms. I know the firm. I know its founder. He's a friend of mine and everything like that, so I don't know what you heard or whatever. But let me, yeah, well, okay. Well, but let me just tell you why I'm not going to answer your questions tonight and then how we're going to get around it in a legal way, because I've asked for this. Because it's just an odd rule. I can't say I hate it. I don't like it, but I have to follow it, okay? We hired some guys that everybody told me were the best ethics guys in the state. It's a firm called Koblenz, Penvos, and Froning. Had a Zoom call. That's my big bald head in the top and the middle. There's about 4 guys in red squares that are telling me exactly how to do this. And you got to be careful, right? You're from out of state. Some local guy gets pissed off, files a grievance against you for not doing it the right way. So I follow it by the book to the letter, okay? And what did they tell me? Well, they didn't have to tell me. They sent me an opinion from the Supreme Court of Ohio's Board of Professional Conduct where 2 questions were asked. Number 1, may a lawyer present a legal seminar to prospective clients and provide brochures and folders with firm information at the entrance or exit of the legal seminar, what we're doing here? And they said, yeah, you can. You can present an informational legal seminar to prospective clients. You may also place law firm brochures and information near the exit of the seminar, provided that the lawyer doesn't personally distribute them. So if you want them, pick them up. They're on the exit because of this. Number two, and this is the one that kind of caught me off guard because I've never seen this in any other state. May a lawyer stay after a seminar to answer follow-up questions of attendees or meet with attendees who sign up to meet with a lawyer in advance of the seminar? And the answer is no. Why that is so is beyond me. I think it's bad public policy. I think we should try to get information out as best we can, and the best way to do that is what you heard was being done. Answer all the questions. And I do town hall meetings all over the United States, done thousands of them, dealing with corn farming cases and California wildfire cases, and I don't leave till the last question's answered. But these people are telling me I can't even answer your questions, which is frustrating. So what are we doing? Well, you can schedule an appointment to meet with us. Bernie Kozar, some of you saw here, his sister now works for us and mans our office, or females our office, right next to the donut shop downtown. And so let me just give you some parting shots, and I'm going to go back and give you that website, ma'am, okay? Number one, I always tell people this, and this is especially important. Your health must be your primary consideration. Okay? It's a heck of a lot more important than any lawsuit. Put your health first. It's all that matters. Second, my advice, and go to your own doctor. Don't listen to medical advice from a lawyer, but get tested for your own peace of mind. It happens to help your lawsuit if it shows something in there. If it shows everything's negative, great. Okay? But you'll know. Get tested before too much time passes. I know this from some of these previous lawsuits. There was a benzene release in South Texas near Houston back in 2010. BP, at the same time they started that big oil spill you know about, had a 6-week-long benzene burn that they couldn't get under control. And of course, the whole town signed up saying, I've got scratchy throat, I've got an increased risk of cancer and the like. And the science of benzene, which is one of the 6 conditions, is it dissipates out of your blood and your urine over time. In that case, people stopped taking in new cases after 6 months because we knew it wouldn't be in the blood or in the urine, okay? The sooner you get tested, the better off you are. Again, I can't give medical advice, so consult with your physician. We're going to be doing additional town halls. My wife, who doesn't even know I'm here tonight, she's really pissed at me because I've been gone 4 nights this week. But I wanted to get another meeting in here, and we're going across the border to Pennsylvania to talk to them, but before I take spring break off with my grandsons to teach them how to ski. But we'll be back here week after next on the 23rd, so you can tell your neighbors. And again, you can pick up other firm materials at the exits. Our first meeting was outside the high school, and that's kind of what we did. Same thing on the way out, you can get it, okay? All right, you can reach us in 4 ways. Number one, the one I recommend most is go to the website eastpalestinejustice.com. We're trying to load up a lot of information, okay? Lots of videos, lots of stuff, and the like. You can come see us. It says afternoon tomorrow. I should have taken that out. That was afternoon tomorrow a couple of weeks ago. We've been open for a couple of weeks. We'll have colleagues, including Bernie's sister, at 12 East Main Street, Suite 14, right next to the donut shop where I ate too much stuff for breakfast a week or so ago, and we'll be there to answer your questions. Third, you can call us at 330-470-8296. And lastly, you can visit with us when we return on March the 23rd. To tell you how pressing I think this is and why it's important neighbor to neighbor, on the 24th, I'm supposed to be in Maine. I'm working on a water pollution case up there. You've heard about these forever chemicals. It's a terrible deal. But the bottom line is that that's what we got. Now let me get back and give you that website about the testing for the saliva, because this is something we just added, and I think it's good. And what we'll want to do is get a baseline and then test it later. But if you can do it for $1, that's pretty good, right? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, let me, without answering your question, let me give you a speech about West Virginia. Just 1 second. Okay, there's your website if you want to write it down. And if you got a camera, take a picture of this, because it's been super frustrating. I've talked to every testing outfit in a 50-mile area, both sides and like that. The point is that, you remember when I told you that a court of law is different than the court of public opinion? Anybody can read all the newspaper and realize you were exposed to really bad stuff. But in a court of law, I've got the burden of showing that you were exposed with objective evidence, okay? So a saliva sample, blood sample, urine sample gets us what we need, okay? There'll be a future testing, but it's so important because this stuff will dissipate out of your system, okay? Now, without answering anybody's question, the fact of the matter is you live in an area that is kind of what I would call a tri-state connection, okay? And so there is a lot of work being done with respect to how far that plume, that cloud went to where it settled and exposed people. There's multiple ways to be exposed, okay? It can be from settling from that cloud or that plume, or it can be through the migration of water, okay? The Ohio River, past it right now, okay? That's why I hired a hydrologist, Bob Bocock, and frankly, he's the best hydrologist, in my view, in the world. There's a lot of work being done with respect to that as fast as we can, okay? I'm particularly knowledgeable of this issue because of the PFAS work that we're doing up in Maine. This stuff moves, and I don't want to tell you that I know where it is, because I don't, okay? But we are studying it quickly, and it doesn't really matter. The good Lord does not care that, you know, you live in this state or that state or whatever. It's where the stuff is, right? So there's really no difference. Now, one thing I didn't mention, even though I defer to the Ohio lawyers, when I'm about to go across the state line to Pennsylvania. Does Pennsylvania law apply for those people versus Ohio law? There's choice of law rules that apply. There's differences in the law. You heard about the economic loss doctrine over there. You know, the bottom line is that I've talked a lot about fear of cancer, but according to Bocock, spraying a bunch of Febreze and wiping down something doesn't get it out of your house, okay? There's a very sophisticated remediation process that costs a lot of money. We're working on all that, okay? These causes of action will be a couple things. You know, we'll allege that you suffered emotional distress because you were in the zone of danger. Of course, if you were over in Boston when this happened, you don't have that. You went back, you're concerned about stuff. So number one, you want your home remediated, your soil remediated. If it's in the water, you want it out of the water. All that costs a lot of money, okay? Secondly, the dirty secret, and it's not a secret, I mean, your common sense will tell you this, the value of your houses just went down through no fault of your own, okay? Now, I hope, and one thing I love about this community and the people that we've talked to is the people here are solid folk. And I don't get the impression that people are moving in and out of here a lot because they, are migratory. But if you want to move, your property value is less than it was before February the 3rd, because there's a stigma to these types of events, okay? I was talking to a family before this that lives across the road from East Palestine. I said, well, the good thing is we're in a different town. They're 6 feet away. But it made a good point with respect to stigma, real estate stigma. Banks are kind of getting squeamy with respect to real estate deals here. We'll have to see how that shakes out. But what we do in all these wildfire cases is we can look at the sales data as to what the average price per square foot that had been obtained for sales in this area before February the 3rd. And then we'll look over the next year or so. There won't be near as many sales, but the sales that do exist will go down. And then that will establish through the principle known as subtraction. If it was $500 a square foot and now it's $350, your damages are $150 a square foot in lost market value, okay? And then of course the cost to clean it up. And then in addition, at least as for my clients, if you can show up with blood, urine, DNA, showing that you physically had it in your body, then I think you have an objective basis for a fear of cancer claim. But if you can't show that through a test, I'm not even going to plead it because I don't think it'll survive the Hirsch versus CSX opinion, okay? Now, one other thing. Again, other than my geography lesson about West Virginia, I can't answer any questions, okay? How do we get around that? Because I love answering questions. If you decide that Tom and I are the lawyer for you, and you go and you meet with us at the office, or you go to the website, you can sign up on the website and like that, that's immediately fed in. And I get data as to who all the folks are, and there's hundreds that have already signed up. Well, now I want to talk to those people and answer their questions. So we do something called telephonic town halls. And it's kind of a cool technology that saves a bunch of money, but you've already met me. Why do you need to see my ugly bald head again? I mean, you want to, don't get me wrong, I get it, you want to talk to your lawyer. But from Texas or from Puerto Rico, where I live when I want to live on a beach, I can do something called Zoom. I'd never even heard of it before the pandemic. Now it's all what we did for 3 years, you know. There's also a technology called a telephonic town hall where I can, you know, we're going to ask for your cell number. I don't want your home number, I want your cell number. I want your email address, because I can call you or I can text you updates for free. I can email you updates for free, but I can also do something really cool, and that is something like this. I can send a text out to 50,000 people at once for free. It says, on Friday, we're going to have a telephonic town hall at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're going to get a call from me at 5 p.m. You answer the phone at 5 p.m. If you want to listen in, press *3 or whatever the direction is, and you can listen in to a talk. And what I did Monday night of this week at 6:30 Eastern is I talked to all the clients that I had, and I answered every question that had been submitted that weird Ohio rule says I can't answer here. Okay? So the first thing that I can tell you is that if you decide you want us to be your lawyer, you sign up, we'll add you to the list, and we're immediately going to send you a transcript of Monday's Q&A so that you're at least up to date. And then it's just kind of an iterative process where you keep firing off questions, we keep answering them. And it's really helpful for us as well, okay? And so this is a process that goes back and forth, okay? I'm going to be in Utah with my grandkids next week, but we will be back here on the 23rd. Do we know where? Is it at the high school on the 23rd, or we don't have it set up yet? High school? Palestine High School, what time? Oh, here. Okay, so here at the theater and Black Hawk High School if you're in Pennsylvania. Okay, yeah, so this one we're doing you guys first and then later. Next one we'll do you guys later. And Aaron and Bob will be here as well. You know, to be honest with you, I wasn't even planning on coming today, but you've heard about these Camp Lejeune water pollution cases, the big mill. You had to be an idiot or no TV if you haven't heard about it, because $150 million worth of ads. I'm real big in that case and represent a whole lot of people, but we were at Camp Lejeune today working on stuff. And we'd planned to spend the whole day there, and I literally looked at a map of the United States and figured out that I was an hour away from you guys. Why wouldn't I get back up here and just blow the extra hour and talk to a new group? And we really wanted to talk to the people of Pennsylvania. Same concept on the 23rd. I'm going up to Maine to talk to a bunch of our water pollution clients up there. I could fly right over you and say hi, or I could stop and do another town hall. So that's what we're doing, okay? So the 23rd at 7, you don't have to come again. You're going to hear the exact same thing. But between now and then, if you have questions, fire them off to us. We've got somebody that takes them all in. We answer them. We do another town hall, or we'll send you an email answer and the like in a way that's consistent with what the Ohio Supreme Court's Ethics Committee says we have to do. Okay? Thanks for coming, and God bless you. Okay?